Yeah, it's better now. So let me give you a quick introduction about Mr. Basil. He's the founder and CEO of Villgro Innovations Foundation. Over the last decade, Mr. Basil has incubated over 200 innovative enterprises, creating over 4,000 jobs, touching around 15 million lives in villages across India. Mr. Basil also co-founded Ventara Venture Advisors, a seed stage impact fund that makes venture investments in for-profit impactful enterprises. He was awarded the Ashoka Fellowship in 2002 for his outstanding social entrepreneurship in setting up Villgro. He's also been conferred the Samaj Seva Bhushan Award and the Star Entrepreneur Award. So over to you, Paul.
All right, thank you, Parivasha. I thought it was important to start with a little bit of context on what kind of an organization we are. And that context is important to understand why certain strategies work for us. It doesn't mean all these strategies will work for you. So I just wanted to set the context in what type of an organization we are. We call ourselves an incubator of social enterprises. We fund, mentor, network for social entrepreneurs to make them investable. And as mentioned, over the last 17 years, we worked with over 200 odd enterprises, created 4,000 jobs, touched around 17 million lives across the country. We work in the sectors of agribusiness, healthcare, specifically medical devices, diagnostics with a maternal and child healthcare focus. We focus on education, K-12, and skills and employability. We focus on energy, especially energy access and productive use of energy. So those are the four sectors: agribusiness, health, education, and energy are key driving sectors that we really work with. As earlier mentioned, we seed fund companies in the range of $200,000 to $200,000. We mentor them, we network for them, and make them investable. So we also work in Kenya, Philippines, and Vietnam, in addition to working in India. And the idea is to demonstrate that incubation is a replicable model in other continents. With that as a context, let me just quickly take you through a short film about Villgro to give you a little bit of a deeper context about the kind of talent and the context of that talent.
The main characteristic of an inventor is curiosity.
Keen sense of observation.
You feel like you're doing something that makes a difference.
You just push yourself and you feel like pushing yourself.
You have to be really crazy and a little mad to think you can do this.
But it came to me in a dream.
It's more of a way of life or a way of thinking.
Always looking for problems and also solutions to those problems.
But it's in that initial stage when you're the only person who believes in it. You need an organization that believes in you, and Villgro is focused on that.
Use innovation, the power of innovation, combined with entrepreneurship, for-profit entrepreneurship, to impact lives of people.
Villgro provides a bit of seed funding to help those businesses get off the ground.
We are talking of over 1.5 million people not having access to ventilators today, and we don't know what their fate is. The One Breath is an example of how we have simplified the mechanical structure of the ventilator. So you've got higher reliability and a cheaper product. Our goal is to serve a community that cannot afford to buy one. Villgro has been very supportive, understanding about the early stage product development, product manufacturing, and finally to product market.
India is the largest producer and consumer of milk. A lot of milk spoils. If we could address the problem, I think we could develop a good business. Villgro was very important for us because with their help, we were able to fund our first 4 milk chiller prototypes.
54% of females in India would be anemic. It's a long-standing problem. Let's invent something to use technology to kind of solve a little part of that problem.
So basically, it's a device that can screen for anemia without the need of any blood sample or without any finger prick.
Once we buy into your vision, then we invest extremely deeply in making you succeed.
Villgro gets involved in mentoring and providing self-reflection that businesses need to do in order to grow to the next step.
I really believe that you can inspire and coach people to become successful innovators.
The work we do can have a social impact, can make a difference to the lives of people who are underprivileged.
The impact is immeasurable.
You have an idea, you have an invention, come here, and we will give you everything that's required.
Okay, so with that context, let me talk about, therefore, if we need to support such entrepreneurs and really make them successful, investable, and highly impactful, the kind of talent that works with us is very critical. Now, let me just give you profiles of 3 members in our team, and this is kind of I would say an example of the type of people that work with us and therefore replicable across our company. Say, take member 1 with 25 years of experience in the industry, from the healthcare industry. You see the companies that he's worked, Phoenix Medical Systems, Cleveland Medical Polymers, right? With serious research, business development, and operations experience. You need such very senior talent to advise companies how to actually make their products work at the base of the pyramid. You need very focused sectoral expertise, and that is exactly what member 1 is all about, very deep in health. Now take member 2, with far lesser years of experience with investment banking and the sectors of agri, with a little bit of experience in Goldman Sachs and a non-profit in Gram Vikas, spends a lot of time, and the experience that that person has gained within Villgro is around entrepreneurship, operations around entrepreneurship, but much younger team member. Hasn't built a company before, has exposure to entrepreneurship, but is required. This kind of a talent is also required to make some of these entrepreneurs successful. And a similar experience from the education sector, worked in Maruti Suzuki, in Tata Motors, and then did a wonderful Teach for India fellowship, created a non-profit called Just for Cakes, but has immense experience in actually being an entrepreneur himself or herself, but with around 6 to 7 years experience. Now, the reason why I mentioned this profile is for the group that is listening to this to understand the type of talent that is working with us. And therefore, if we need to attract and retain this talent, there are important things that we need to do. That's going to be the focus of the discussion in the next set of slides. So with that, I move to what are we doing to actually get them, actually, why do they get attracted to us more than what are we doing to get them attracted to us? The first reason why they get attracted to us is because entrepreneurship with impact and impact investing has really grown over the last few years. If anyone wants to see how entrepreneurship is creating impact, how startup entrepreneurs are being created, Villgro is the place. At any point, at this point, we have a portfolio size of around 120 odd companies directly being incubated within Villgro and with our partner organizations in multiple states of India and outside of India. So you get an entire geographical perspective, cross-country perspective, you get a cross-sectoral perspective from agribusiness to education to energy to healthcare. This is very critical, and for a youngster, the types member 1 and member 2 and member 3 that I mentioned really prepares them for their MBA. So that's one group, the younger group, and they come in because this whole learning around entrepreneurship for impact actually prepares them for their next jump, you know, after 3 to 5 years of work to do a formal MBA. The other group, the member 1 group that I mentioned, with far more seniority and experience and expertise, comes in because they've now reached a stage in their life where they've made the rich richer and now feel that they need to actually contribute their skills to making the poor richer. And they then do that job as by full-time members or mentors with Villgro. So that's essentially the member 1 category really comes in because they believe that they can leverage their skills. The member 2 and 3 categories, which are the lesser experienced people, come in because they know that they can acquire greater knowledge and therefore on their path to possibly an MBA. And these younger folks and the senior folks now contribute that knowledge across, the ecosystem through various blogs. So we make sure that one of the key performance indicators is not just the learning, but how they communicate and articulating that learning to the ecosystem. And our blog really serves that purpose. And we encourage people and provide them certain knowledge goals, and part of that is actually through the blog. So many of our younger team members really do a lot of work. The good work that they're doing, they actually convert it into a good blog, and that actually helps them actually generate far greater visibility in the marketplace. The second reason why we believe that talent always retains within a company or even gets attracted to it is because of a super culture. And that super culture really means a couple of things. The first and the foremost, which I believe is really openness and transparency. The kind of organization we aren't a big company, 100 people, 150 people. That's not the size we are. We're in the size of 30 to 40 people. At that 30 to 40 size, if you really need to attract the best and retain the best, a culture of openness and a culture of transparency is important. Processes are equally important, but the ability to actually embrace change, be open, be transparent, be flexible with those processes is equally important. So openness and transparency is an important contributor to that super culture. But we also reinforce that culture because we select for values. And the key values, given the work that we do, are boldness, entrepreneurial spirit, empathy, and integrity. We really select for these values. So any person being selected goes through a final interview with me. And at that point, when we're doing referral checks, we're really selecting for these values. We're talking about behaviors or events in their earlier professional careers that have demonstrated some of these values. Because we work with early stage entrepreneurs, and those entrepreneurs are solving really compelling problems and very difficult problems to solve, if our team members didn't embody these values, there is a disconnect and a misalignment with the talent that we hire and the kind of customers in form of entrepreneurs that we have. So we really select for values. The other reason why people treat it as super culture is because they're very, very inclusive. The openness and the transparency therefore leads to inclusiveness, decision making, and a very, very collaborative monthly org review and weekly conversation. So that really contributes to an inclusive culture, and therefore I wouldn't say collective decision making, but I think a voice of the team heard as decisions are being made. There's a lot of peer feedback, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, but we do something called a Let's Get Candid sessions, which allow every team member once in 6 months to give feedback on every other team member in the organization. And that actually becomes important, where open feedback many times is not very easy, in spite of the openness and the transparency we've encouraged. But this particular session about getting candid allows people to give a feedback across. So 360-degree feedback on an individual, every individual, including me, I get from my 29 other colleagues. And that actually is a good dipstick, like a performance appraisal, that allows you to reflect on what others are perceiving you to be. In some cases, maybe not even perception, that might be truth. So it's important to actually address that, and that actually builds a super open culture and allows change to happen. And of course, office parties. And this kind of mix that we're talking about, the young group and the seasoned group in terms of employees, does mean that we need to celebrate our small wins and of course, therefore, parties and things like that. So what you see here is, on the first picture, is really some of our learning sessions, where a lot of every month we kind of discuss each company that we work with, or a particular issue like a working capital issue or a pricing issue or a go-to-market issue. So there are learning sessions that actually allow some of that discussions to happen and surface some of these learnings. And a lot of parting that I talk about. The table there really talks about the let's get candid feedback. This is a feedback given by a particular member to 3 other members. Maybe not as tight as one we would like it, but you get a dipstick and you get a good peek into what others are thinking of you. And this kind of a let's get candid feedback actually improves one's own behavior, performance, and things like that. From that, I moved to another reason which we consider important. Even though we are not a big organization hierarchically with various layers and levels, we are a networked organization with Villgros in other countries, with Villgro partnering to license our model and incubate other incubators within India. We have partner organizations where we closely work with, and we have our incubatees who we actually incubate and support. So many of our team members have the opportunity to move to another Villgro. So for example, a colleague from India moved to become the chief operating officer of Villgro Kenya. One of my colleagues in India moved to Manila to actually become the co-founder of Villgro Philippines there. Similarly, we have an investment fund called Mentera, which sits by the side of Villgro. It is a proper venture capital fund, an impact investment fund. Many of my colleagues from Villgro are now team members at Mentera. So that is actually another kind of a career progression that they are offered. Some of them have actually gone on to become entrepreneurs themselves. Having been supporting entrepreneurs, they realize that, hey, after all, this is what it takes to become an entrepreneur. And they also encounter a lot of problem areas and solutions, and that allows them to actually become bold and become an entrepreneur or a co-founder of an enterprise. That's another career progression. And as I mentioned earlier, many young team members go on to do their MBA. And that MBA in most cases is with a social enterprise specialization. And that we're so happy that such talent is being contributed to the sector, having started off with Villgro. So to summarize, because of a potential career progression, and the career progression is not really vertical across our partner organizations, across enterprises that we incubate, that really helps. To help achieve that career progression, every team member is guided by a senior mentor. The senior team members at Villgro find time to actually mentor our junior colleagues. But most importantly, when a junior colleague joins, they're matched with an existing team member we call a buddy mentor, and that allows them to immerse and sink into the organization and seamlessly immerse themselves as their new joinees within an organization. So a senior mentor to actually help them shepherd them through this career progression and other issues, but a buddy mentor that allows them to immerse themselves and induct themselves as they join Villgro. We're told that these are important elements that actually attracts and retains people within Villgro. Really, I wouldn't say this. There's no reason why I put this slide at this stage, but I believe that a competitive compensation is very, very critical. A competitive compensation is very, very, very required to actually attract, especially not necessarily that member 2 and 3 talent, but the 1 talent that I spoke about. But we will never be able to retain member 2 and member 3 if we didn't offer them a competitive compensation. So many years back, we used to do what is called a need-based compensation philosophy. So I still remember we used to map out what we thought that a team member with 2-3 years experience should actually possess. So we said they need to own a 2-wheeler, they need to be able to rent a house, and a house of a rent of a so much kind, so we started quantifying it, and we did a need-based philosophy. We didn't realize that the aspirations of some of these younger team members was more than a two-wheeler, right? The aspirations were to make loan repayments happen. Aspirations was to actually own a car and things like that. So we started moving towards I wouldn't call it market-based compensation, but I would call it a social enterprise market compensation. And for that, we relied on the ANDI, the Aspen Network for Development Entrepreneur Compensation Surveys, as a benchmark. And what we've done is we've tried to match some of the compensation which is actually there. Maybe in some cases, in some bands and some levels, we don't match, but we've tried to get as closer to those compensation benchmarks that has been as much as possible. So that's the other piece, I think, which is very critical. I think paying people appropriately is very, very, very critical. Maybe not always necessarily linked to market salaries, but appropriate to the kind of talent who you're really seeking. I think you need to have competitive compensation in place. The other piece that is important is we've realized that a lot of nonprofits are not very sharp about their goals and their performance indicators. So we have a key performance indicator approach, which is really top three indicators that are critical for the success and the performance of that individual, and a proportion of the compensation, which we call a performance linked incentive, linked to achievement of those KPIs. And what we've seen is, the idea was to instill a sense of urgency, but at the same time, a clarity of roles and tasks, which many times I see missing out in nonprofits. How do you really build and sharpen clarity of roles and tasks? And we've seen that with key performance indicators, we've seen that, that is something that we've been able to achieve. And then incentivize people when they achieve that with our performance linked incentives. We've seen this interesting combination of achieving urgency in helping achieve our goals and our mission faster as much as possible. I have seen a lot of people from the nonprofit sector extremely excited about the mission, but extremely disillusioned by the day-to-day operations and the lack of direction, supervision, clarity of roles. We've seen that across the organization, building KPIs help address that particular issue of clarity of roles and deliverables and tasks. So that's the other reason we've employed effectively to actually excite people and keep them focused within Villgro. And what you see here is a simple, template, a key performance indicator, the method used for measurement, the targets that we do. Then we have a weightage assigned to it on a quarter basis, and then there's an actual. And depending on how they achieve that, there's a payout that happens once every quarter. So that's kind of an example of key performance indicator and the performance linked incentive, the way we track that and measure it. The other piece is, a lot of people who work with us come in because they believe that they can build a lot of networks. And the networks that I'm talking about is with very seasoned, experienced mentors, with investment community, with entrepreneurs, with corporates, especially because our entrepreneurs now connect for go-to-market with a lot of corporates. So with corporates, they get a lot of speaking engagements, jury positions. They get a chance to actually get interviewed by lots of journalists. Now, all these are huge networks that they can build in I'd say, a usual organization. So that adds to their credibility, to their therefore their networks. And what you see here is a picture of one of our team members at a particular jury challenge of the National Bio and Entrepreneurship. Becoming part of the jury is a really exciting moment for her. And that actually gives them the motivation to rub shoulders with very seasoned people, and therefore building their networks in that as they do that. And on the right side, you members. That photograph, unfortunately, is a little bit blurred and not as visible as I would have liked it to be. But one of our team members, Shankar, spending time as a panelist at the World Wildlife Fund Clean Tech Innovation Panel. And that's exciting for Shankar to share as a junior member his experience as of our experience of incubating early stage climate friendly clean tech innovation and enterprise. So all these younger team members representing Villgro at these various platforms gives them the required motivation. And as younger team members do that, more younger team members get attracted to us because now they know that there is this visibility and networks that they can build as they shape a career at Villgro. Essentially, to summarize, we attract talent, as I mentioned, because our mission is exciting, because the mission is all about entrepreneurship with impact. Second, we attract talent because of a culture of transparency, collegiality, openness, and collaboration. Third, we attract talent because of a potential career progression, some of it within, but more of it outside with our partner organizations. Fourth, we attract talent because of a competitive compensation benchmark with the Aspen Network for Development Entrepreneurs Salary Survey. And finally, we attract talent because they see the networks that are being created with prominent individuals in the social enterprise sector. So that brings me to the end of the presentation. So these are our best practices and learnings that we've had to actually attract talent, given the kind of work that we do of incubating and supporting early stage social enterprises. So I'll pause here and then flip to Paribhasha to actually moderate any questions that any of the participants have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Paul. So we can give a couple of minutes to our participants and you can post your questions in the Q&A section and we can take forward from there. So we've got the first question from Avipsa, and she's asking how to resolve attrition problem.
You know, I wish I had the answer, but I think, really the issue is if you attract a person for whom the mission is really exciting, when the going gets tough, that person still continues. Make sure that the person that you hire, a lot of it in my mind lies in how you are hiring, who you are hiring. So make sure that you hire for that mission fit. That's point number one. Point number two, a lot of the attrition happens in my mind because of 3-4 things in nonprofits: lack of good compensation, absence of a boss that can actually mentor them and guide them effectively, and lack of clarity of purpose and goals. And the examples that I spoke about was trying to instill some of that through the compensation approach that I spoke about, the key performance indicators, and very close reviews, weekly, monthly, and things like that, that gives them a sense of achievement as opposed to a very loose, unstructured working environment. So if you create that kind of a working environment, along with a open culture, transparency, and things like that, I think one can reduce attrition. Having said that, I think, as I mentioned earlier, member 2 and member 3 category of type of talent who's wanting to gain experience, aspiring to do an MBA, there's no way you can retain, and I don't think you should be worried about retaining them beyond a point, because that fresh talent is always required in the system. Some existing talent should move on and fresh talent should come into the system. That's how a vibrant organization will be built. So while you need to make sure that attrition doesn't affect and collapse the processes and it is not too disruptive, you got to make sure that you factor in there is change and a new set of people that come in, is my thinking. So you need to the couple of points that I mentioned, in my view, are the ones that will hopefully retain people in the kind of environment, in the kind of work environment that Villgro like organization does. And it might need to get customized to the particular work environment of yours. I don't know the exact context of your organization and the work environment, but you might need to customize some of these best HR practices to your context.
Thank you, Paul. There's another question asked by Lakshmi. How do you think organizations with limited budgets can showcase themselves as great employers? Do the other aspects of the EVP work without compensation?
Yeah, I've put this there because I believe that that is important. I think scaling an organization, oh, sorry, let me rephrase this. I don't think all talent is driven by compensation. Let me also phrase that some talent give a certain time duration to taking pay cuts. So the question is, what type of talent that you want? How long are you willing to hold that talent with a meager compensation? Or for a moment, let's call it appropriate compensation. And at what point would they need to jump off that, appropriate compensation to fetch something larger? I don't have an answer, but I think there's a combination of volunteers that people recruit to actually solve problems in some of these places. I don't have too much of experience of working in a meager setting that you're referring to. And therefore, I wouldn't be able to fully answer that question. But I think I have seen organizations rely a lot on volunteers, interns, where you really don't have the ability to pay. But the point that I'm trying to make is, in such an organization which depends on volunteers and interns, there's a core team that I still believe needs to be paid reasonably well to sustain their aspirations if you don't want attrition. And I think making sure that that core team continues to stay, no attrition, they are they hold the organization together, they make sure that knowledge losses don't affect the organization is critical. And for that group, however meager the budgets are, you've got to make sure that that core group is funded adequately, without which I think you'll have a serious problem. So I think you should differentiate between a lot of talent that you might want to go after a time. That's okay. Maybe the less critical talent, but the core team, I think, should be compensated adequately and sufficiently to make sure that they do this for a long haul.
Thank you, Paul. We have another question related to attrition here. Sneha is asking the average time spent by younger employees at Villgro in number of years.
Yeah. Roughly we are seeing anywhere between 2 to 3 years. And partly because that 2-year phase is a good time for a person to get into an MBA course. But it's interesting that we're seeing that moving up to 4 to 5 years in cases where people want an international MBA as opposed to an Indian MBA. So I think it's varying a little bit. Some people come to us with 2 years of experience and then spend 3 years here and then move to an international MBA. The others, very few come to us fresh out of campus. And the others who come, roughly, I would say a longevity of 2 to 3 years is what I would put as the kind of time frame that they contribute before they move on.
Okay. We have another question by Adil, and he wants to know more about the case studies of Villgro activities, apart from what has been shared here.
Yeah. So what I would really request Adil to do is go to our website, villgro.org. There is a section on resources, And there's a lot of case studies of the enterprises that we've supported, some of the research that we've done on talent and talent related issues, where we've commissioned research to study some of these issues. So I would really point, I mean, this kind of a short webinar will do no justice to satisfying Adil. So my request, Adil, would be to just go to that website, and those readings, I think, will be extremely helpful for you. So villgro.org, there's a section on resources, and you might want to visit that section. Please also, as much as possible, track our blog, the Villgro blog, and sign up for our newsletters and social media. That will actually give you a peek into a lot of our work, updates from our end, case studies at our end, and so on and so forth.
Great. Sucheta Yadav, she's asking, what kind of advice will you share for a recruiter?
You know, I think the biggest challenge that I'm seeing is the ability of recruiters to spend enough time to understand the aspiration of the youngster who wants to join, and the culture of the organization. And especially because these assignments are very transactional and short time frame, incentivized based on compensation, you know, it's a really challenging one. So as a recruiter, working with small organizations, I think, is always a challenge. We've gone the path of actually hiring a person inside to address a lot of our HR needs, but achieve a lot of the recruiting through effective use of social media and a lot of word of mouth and referrals. Using recruiters for junior level positions, we found it as a big challenge because recruiters aren't interested, given the compensation, because their fee is linked to the kind of compensation. I think the effort required for a recruiter to match a youngster with an organization is also difficult, because that matchmaking requires time and effort, and the compensation is linked to a percentage of the CTC, and it's not always very exciting enough. So I would think, if you want to get into a partnership with an organization, you might want to promote the idea of not just doing recruitment as a function, but expand that horizon to do a little bit of HR functions, and then you actually do a kind of a retainership with smaller non-profits to address their comprehensive HR requirements, of which recruitment will be one part of it. And by doing that, maybe you might be able to earn a higher fee, and that will allow you to also recruit candidates through that. So a transactional mode of working with, I think, smaller non-profits, I think, is going to be a challenge for recruitment firms. And then maybe therefore platforms like Naukri or a rural Naukri then will kick in. And that's also a good business model for, you know, recruiting people for smaller organizations. But I would think a more comprehensive kind of an HR partnership, I think, is what is really required.
Thanks, Paul. We have next question from Vishakha. And she's asking, what components do you include in peer feedback? Are these standard across levels in the organization?
Yeah, so this peer feedback thing, we haven't standardized it as yet. Because we also do it across time, we wanted to make sure that top of the mind pressing things that came out, which really is a combination of emotion, feelings, and things like that, with less structure, is the way we are approaching it right now. But I think what will happen over time is we will convert that into a little bit more formal structures around things like behaviors and teamwork, collegiality, respect for values, and things like that. But these are considerations that people have had in their minds as they've actually, you know, the presentation that I used. And if I go back to that, let's get candid feedback. If you think about the table there, this member one, they've got feedback on, they're talking about taking greater responsibilities. That the other person is telling him that, hey, you are so capable, but you should take on more responsibility. Now, while if you actually look at member three's feedback, they're telling him, hey, take more initiative. Now we could break this down and then, create a little bit more structure. But given that we've done this only for, I would say 3 or 4 cycles now, maybe we'll get into a little bit of a structure over this over time. But right now, it's a little bit open and unstructured.
Okay. We have a next question from Vaibhav Arora, and he wants to know, what will you suggest to students who want to get into development sector, get higher education in the courses or programs available, or look for more experience first?
Yeah, I would think any youngster, there are 2 pieces or 2 eyes that I would actually recommend. Be sure that you're inspired to do this. So seek out for greater inspiration. And one way of achieving that inspiration is listening to people from the sector speak. And so therefore what ISDM is doing through this webinar is an interesting way for you to remain inspired, to get more ideas and continue with that and do more of it. Attend conferences, be it a Sankalp in Mumbai that brings together impact investors and social entrepreneurs, similar to Villgro's Unconvention that happens in Bangalore every year, or an Action for India's roundtable and community that they actually do in other cities. So make sure that you attend some of these conferences. Make sure that you continue to be a part of webinars like this. Please also read as much as possible. There are very, very interesting books in the field of social entrepreneurship. How to Change the World by David Bornstein really features a lot of social entrepreneurs. Mohammed Yunus's experiences on how to build a social business is an interesting perspective that actually has built a new concept, which he called social business as opposed to social enterprise. So I think reading books, I would say reading, listening, volunteering with some of these early stage social enterprises are all great ways to get inspired. I would think once you're ready for that, take the plunge. And if you're also still unsure, maybe an internship is a great way to actually get immersed. And a couple of internships with a break here, I think might be a great idea with multiple organizations. And I've seen people do it with an investment firm, with a social entrepreneur, with an intermediary like a consulting company, and then you get a good rounded view of the social enterprise sector. And once you get immersed with a rounded view here with a break here, I think you're much more well informed as to possibly what career path to take, or even what kind of a course to pursue post that immersion. So I would say get inspired, continue to stay inspired, even if you're 5 years, 10 years into a social enterprise career. But at the same time, if you're very young and want to get into the social enterprise sector, in addition to getting inspired, please also get yourself immersed in the ways that I mentioned.
Thank you, Paul. The next one is interesting for me because I kind of struggle with answering this. Hi. So it's from Praveen and is asking, how do you ensure the fit while recruiting? For example, mission alignment, which is the most important, is difficult to gauge during the recruitment process.
So this is not very conversation. I would say we don't pick these up only in conversations. A lot of it is picked up in referral feedback. How one behaved in the past. That's one area that we pick it up. The second area we pick up is we encourage people to spend a couple of hours with us at our office before we even offer them a job. When we do that, and when people walk around, they do lunches with our colleagues and conversations happen, we get a good sense of their overall larger commitment. And finally, we encourage people to be as honest as possible, because if this is for themselves, right? I mean, they need to self-select organizations for their own mission. It is not that we select, we give them enough information that they self-select. And finally, if they don't fit this culture and mission, we will finally ask them to leave. So we give them that opportunity saying, hey, self-select yourself. seek out more information from us. At some point, if you're not doing really well, and let me give you an example of one particular team member, and that might actually illustrate this. Very committed team member, very mission aligned, but on certain attitudes and values, wasn't really able to cope at the levels that we had set as benchmarks. And that required a couple of, I'd say interaction sessions with that particular team member. And after a point, we actually came to the mutual understanding, saying, hey, you don't fit this culture. And therefore, it might make sense for you to do what you best like. And that what they were doing as what they really like was being done as a hobby. And today, I'm so happy that that person has taken that on as a full-time career. And that's exciting for us. So I think it's important to counsel people out in times when, certain value systems and culture don't align. So you select for it, but you discover the disconnect earlier on in that, engagement with that particular individual, and then counsel people out if the fit is not there, because I think it can be very unproductive if you have such a team member misaligned within the organization, and especially true with smaller organizations.
Yeah, totally agree with that. Sudhesh has next question, and it's he's saying it is believed performance-linked incentives are a double-edged sword in social enterprises because it leads to a short-termism and can come in the way of collaboration. So what's your experience been like?
Oh, I think that's a brilliant question. Thanks for asking that. I think it is indeed a double-edged sword. The skill will lie in how you frame your key performance indicator. I think that's very, very critical. So what we do is for younger team members, we as much as possible define key performance indicators linked to outputs of theirs. Quality of outputs, quantity of outputs, and things like that, which is actually more under their control. For senior team members, we link it to outcomes because they have more decision-making power and therefore more control over those outcomes. Now, what this does is the senior team member is responsible, therefore, and accountable for outcomes, while the junior team member is responsible for the outputs that lead to those outcomes. So that way, there is an effective team play that actually comes in. Though if the outcomes cannot be achieved, the outputs are not realized. And therefore, because the senior team members is held accountable for outcomes and their KPIs and PLIs are linked to outcomes, it's a mutual win and a mutual collaboration, but that happens by default. But is it a perfect system? I would say the answer is no, but we're striving to actually build it as less double-edged sword as it will be, as we would like it to be. Having said that, the interesting observation that we've had is for lots of people, money is not a primary motivator or a driver. Now, what I have seen is it might not be relevant in a relatively smaller organization, I would say below 20 people. But if you aspire as a nonprofit to become 50 people, 60 people, 100 people, I think this double-edged sword is critical, because getting 100 fully committed, fully aligned people is going to be tough. And you might want to use KPIs and PLIs as a method of actually getting people aligned on certain common mission, common goals, and common strategies. So yes, it is a double-edged. It might affect collaboration and team spirit, but a lot of it will depend on how you set KPIs, how you define it at different levels within the organization, and the size of the organization. So and let me also just separate one thing out. Irrespective of the size of the organization, please make sure that you have KPIs. You might not have a performance-linked incentive attached to that KPI, but whether you're a 10-member organization or a 20-member organization, make sure that you have key performance indicators. As the organization size increases, I would think you should incentivize for performing, achieving those KPIs, because for the reasons that I mentioned, as the numbers increase, you'll have all sets of people, and you might need to use PLIs and as a means to actually tie them all together using a common umbilical cord.
Cool. Next question is from Kavita Matthew, and she's asking, is the A&D compensation survey a paid service? How can we access it?
So the ANDI, Aspen Network of Development Entrepreneurs Compensation Survey, they're not a consulting company. They're a membership-based network organization, Villgro is a member of that. Similarly, there are hundreds of organizations which are in the social enterprise sector who are members of that. And this is a member-related service. And the reason is many member organizations don't know what salaries of other organizations are. So it is a confidential, report that is actually available to members of the ANDI network.
Okay. So Shilpi Shri has a question, and it's related to the feedback. How do you make sure that candid sessions driven constructively does not backfire? Feedback is taken in a positive way by the employees.
Yeah. That's a great question. We've seen that when there is a traction created in a culture of openness and transparency, and that is led top down. When I, as the founder and CEO of this organization, is willing to hear any feedback, if my time is available anytime for a person to come to me, of course, based on a calendar, mutual time that we set, if I'm willing to hear, and if that culture is created, across the organization, it permeates a culture of feedback giving, transparency, and openness. So the point is, please do not introduce a let's get candid session into an organization which has a very hierarchy driven, culture. And that can be very unsettling for team members. The first requirement is the leadership of the organization has to believe in openness, transparency, and a collegial work culture. If that culture is encouraged, at some point, you can actually institute this let's get candid sessions. And I would not recommend a let's get candid session in a very hierarchy driven organization, because then people can use it in bad ways and might not be the most, I would say, effective tool to actually give feedback. So a requirement for an effective let's get candid session is a culture of openness, transparency in an organization. In big organizations, therefore, this kind of an approach might not work. You might need to do that session in smaller teams. So if you're a big organization with around 500 people, and if you have an HR team of 5 people, you should do a let's get candid session with the HR team as yourself. And over the marketing team, which is maybe say 50 people, you could break them into geographical based teams and then do your let's get candid session. So I wouldn't, as to summarize, I wouldn't do that in a hierarchical organization. And I would do that in smaller teams in slightly bigger organization with larger number of employees.
Thanks, Paul. So we have a question by Deepon Dev, and he's asking that the organizations who are working with ground level workforce, do these ideas apply there as well?
I think the principles, apply. Who would not want an open work culture? Who wouldn't want to be respected? Right? Who wouldn't want an incentive for an extra effort that they're taking? Who wouldn't want clarity on their goals and tasks? I think the principles of all these remain. But the question is, how do you actually apply? You might not be able to use a sophisticated Excel sheet with some of these weightages with a last mile worker. You might be able to, you might not be able to. So I think the way you apply this, possibly needs to be slightly different, but I would think that the essential principles of these remain. Now, when you refer to say a context where there are, say, village level workers in, say, a non-profit, and these are lesser educated people, I would still think for even for those communities, some of these principles I think still remain. But I think I just want to, we haven't used it in that kind of a context, but my gut tells me that the principles that we've spoken about here, I think will still hold good there. For example, they would want to give feedback to each other. And if they work in small teams, I'm assuming that they would like an openness culture and want to give feedback to each other. You might want to replicate some of this, albeit in a slightly different fashion, and using vernacular medium, using a little bit more proximity approach where you're physically out there as you do it, as opposed to doing it virtual, and so on and so forth.
Great. So this question, next question from Aaron, it's not completely related to the talent strategies. So you can choose if you want to answer this here now. We have 3 minutes. So what are the social media strategies you can use when you're starting an NGO?
Well, I think I would choose not to answer this. I think, but I think making sure that you have a good Facebook handle, Twitter, Insta, LinkedIn, and all of that. But I think equally important is a strong content strategy. Making sure that you know what people want to hear and you're giving that information out, not pushing down what you want people to hear, as opposed to developing a good content strategy. So one of my colleagues spends a lot of time developing that content strategy, and she creates a good social media calendar where every day's social media posts are defined. And then the outreach channels, of course, Facebook, Insta, LinkedIn actually allow that to be pushed out. But I think creating a good content strategy, I think, is critical. And as I mentioned earlier, the blogs that we do are all, through these Facebook and LinkedIn, they all reach out. And I think your question is very critical, especially if it is a startup or an early stage organization that wants to be positioned as a thought leader. Investing a lot on good social media and a good content strategy to position your organization as a thought leader becomes very important. You got to really communicate to the ecosystem that the ideas that this organization comes up with, the experiences that this organization has, the learnings that come out of this organization are really top class. And you got to communicate those learnings and be seen as therefore a thought leader. So I think social media plays a very, very important role to achieve that. And please keep tracking and be like the Villgro page, the Facebook page, the LinkedIn page, and that of many other such organizations like Teach for India and many others. Some are active, some are not. But I think from that, you'll get a sense of what people are doing, how they're trying to achieve that, and how they're trying to differentiate in the process.
Thanks a lot, Paul. And I think that with that, we come to the end of this session. If there are any more questions,